So don't fight brain habit alone, build culture. We've got a problem. We can have every tool in the world. We can practice self-awareness until we're blue in the face, but our brains are still wired as habit machines. Our brains are still locked into patterns of thought and emotion and reaction. And that's why culture matters, because culture changes everything. Even as we become self-aware, even as we see our brain habits so much better, on most days, habit still runs the show. Tools are good, very good. Remember that last episode, that self-awareness tool? So helpful, right? But here's a truth. Our brains don't care how good our tools are. Tools by themselves rarely override brain habit. So in addition to tools, we need culture. Because again, culture changes everything. Here's the hope. In our reconstructed spiritual communities, we can create a culture together, create norms and practices together that will help us use our tools and change our brains. Now, for years, I repeated a mantra in our community: we do the spiritual journey better together. We do the spiritual journey better together. Now, we all know that's true because together we feel so much less alone. We feel more courageous. We're more willing to try things that we wouldn't do alone. Together, we remind ourselves that we are more than our shortcomings, that we are also what we are becoming. Together, as trust grows, we can ask one another, what do you see in me that I don't see? What's it like to be on the receiving end of me? Build the right culture, and we can do that together. But I don't have to tell you, that is not how community normally goes. In fact, that kind of straightforward, vulnerable, transparent human interaction, it's unusual, sometimes a little bit weird, and sometimes not even advisable, unless culture. So that's our gig, leaders of spiritual communities, to help create that kind of culture. If we want our communities to draw from the expanded wisdom that we've been exploring, we have to build tools. We've seen that. But we also have to create culture. I'll give you one example of how our community did that. Now remember that tool that we discussed in the last episode, the self-awareness worksheet. We used that tool to help us create powerful cultural norms. And now again, this is a very real example. I did it. It's very doable. So you will recall we hit on our self-awareness worksheet by deconstructing and reconstructing the ancient practice of confession. And in that old practice, there are two players. The person making the confession, we talked about that last time, but also the person listening to the confession. How might we and then reconstruct that second role, the listener role? How might we reimagine that? Well, let's see. So we have seen the trigger for doing a worksheet. We have an afflictive emotion, sure we do. We react poorly most of the time, yep, do that too, but we don't stop there. After the fact, we then go and set aside some time to do a worksheet. Just like we outlined in the last episode, great, that's just wonderful. We use the writing prompts, we taste life twice, but then after we've done that, we do another thing. We set a time with a trusted friend to go over that worksheet together, to go through it with a listening partner. And here's what we found. As we train people to do those two things, to do the worksheets and to be the listeners, that training has profoundly shaped the culture of our community. Let me explain. I ran into a book 20-some years ago, Time to Think by Nancy Klein. The central premise is this: the quality of everything we do depends on the quality of thinking we do first. The quality of everything that we do depends on the quality of thinking we do first. And the quality of thinking that we do first depends on how well we are listened to while we are thinking. When someone gives us full, uninterrupted attention, uses body language to encourage us, creates a relaxed, unhurried atmosphere for us, welcomes our thoughts as well as our emotions, in that environment we can do our best thinking. In that environment we can experience our best self-awareness. Listening, it turns out, is not passive. It generates better self-awareness. So when we started training a whole bunch of folks in our community to do that kind of listening, before long the culture of the whole community began to reflect that training. And when that happened, everybody just seemed to catch a vibe. We realized together, we do that here. We listen carefully. I was in a group recently. A new person was there and they were not listening very well. But the culture had already been imprinted. For everybody there, it just felt strange that we weren't listening carefully. Everybody knew that is not going to work here, and sure enough, quite gently during the meeting, and then with some intention after the meeting, the newcomer was invited into a better understanding of why we listen the way that we do and how to do it. Because train enough folks to do the worksheets, that kind of self-awareness, and train enough folks to listen well, and the impact isn't just on those people. It's on others who are also part of the community, those that they begin to interact with in a different way of being. Now, one thing that happened, I noticed, was that we began to normalize a different way to be friends. We don't only do what friends do. Friends comfort one another, sure. Friends reassure one another. Of course they do, and they should. But when folks are trained, we can also do another thing in our friendships. We can also practice deep listening. In our friendships, we sometimes refrain from offering advice, refrain from suggesting solutions, refrain from validating or encouraging one another. Sometimes we do not interject our own story because we really can relate, or we do not finish each other's sentences because we really do understand. Sometimes we do not comfort one another, but instead we listen deeply. Now again, friends do all of that stuff. We do relate and we do understand and we do comfort and we should. But we can also do something else. We can practice another way to love one another and train enough people that sometimes the most loving thing that we can do is withhold our urge to help and instead listen deeply, do that, and the community begins to offer to one another the rare gift of time and space for unbroken, deeper thinking and self-awareness. And we, leaders of spiritual communities, we can do that. We can create that kind of culture. Now, I bet you can figure out lots of ways to do it in your community, but here are a few ways that we did it in ours. I would use the platform that my role afforded me, in particular the weekly Sunday lessons. I had a loose schedule where I would teach the worksheet and listening practices in some form twice a year. And I would make those lessons as compelling as I could. I would tell vivid stories about my own experience, the experience of others in the community. I would include enough how-to so folks can understand the process, but more, I would focus on the why. What happens to us? What happens in us when we practice self-awareness, when we create listening spaces for one another? And then during the rest of the year's lessons, I'd illustrate some point or another by referring to the self-awareness practice. I would tell how this person's self-awareness practice changed that situation or opened up that possibility, whatever that lesson was about. I would talk about how somebody's listening practice created space for this to happen or for that to happen. Also, I would troll the community looking for stories, asking for permission to tell those stories, make them anonymous when folks needed that, but over time, it kind of became an accepted norm. People gave me permission to use their stories. Self-awareness practice, self-awareness listening became normal in our community's culture. So I used Sunday lessons extensively. Human transformation can happen. Human transformation is happening, and it could happen in your life, so get involved. Leaders can change culture, and if we do, culture changes everything. With healthy culture, we can actually use the tools of self-awareness, tools that will help us draw from the wisdom of Socrates. Okay, in the next episode, more about creating culture. A culture that normalizes talking about our shit and still belonging after we do. If you'd like to get notified when that goes live, subscribe.